We're live. Alrighty, let's get ourselves situated. Okay, 6:30 is hit. Let's get this show on the road. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Radio DePaul Sports, the student voice of your DePaul Blue Demons, and this is Slingin Leather, Southern California's official combat sports show. And I am your host, Scuba Steve. Thank you all for tuning in. And ladies and gentlemen, I could not be more excited to discuss what we are about to today. We're going to discuss one of the most important fights that I have ever had the pleasure of watching this past Saturday, as well as the rebooking of the UFC heavyweight title fight on UFC 295 coming up next week, which now features, in my opinion, the actual two best heavyweights in the division. But first things first, ladies and gentlemen, I'm probably going to trip over myself a little bit because I'm just so excited to talk about this with you guys. Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou put on arguably one of the most interesting boxing matches that I have ever had the pleasure of watching. And for all of you to accurately understand how this fight went and how it came to be and how everyone is taking this perception of this fight, we are going to have to start from the very beginning. We're going to have to start with the buildup of this fight, as well as the narrative that was going into this bout. Every boxer, every mixed martial artist, and every combat sports journalist was writing Francis Ngannou's obituary ahead of their fight last Saturday. They gave him virtually no shot, myself included. I am not free from criticism here as well, considering just how much of a mismatch it seemed to be at the outset. They gave him no shot. And I thought there was absolutely no way he was even going to be able to survive this fight. Eddie Hearn, a boxing promoter from the UK, said they could have this fight 1 million times and Tyson Fury would win every single time. And in the lead up to this fight, I couldn't agree with him more. Tyson Fury is without a doubt the best heavyweight boxer of this division. He's undefeated. He's only had one tie, and that was against Deontay Wilder. And since we had some reference and some prior context to see what would happen if a mixed martial artist would go into the boxing ring with one of the best, since we had Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather, not a lot of people were necessarily giving him really any shot. And early in this fight week, it was evident that Tyson Fury was taking this fight very, very lightly. He looked incredibly overconfident. He thought he would be in virtually no danger against statistically the hardest puncher in world history in Francis Ngannou, who hits as hard as a Ford Escort going fast as it can or a sledgehammer being swung from overhead. That's how powerful his punches are, which simply does not make any sense. And an additional level of disrespect and sort of writing off his opponent was the fact that he had already booked a fight against Alexander Usyk, despite having this fight right in front of him. I personally have never seen a fighter get double booked that isn't named Khamzat Chimaev. He had two fights booked within weeks apart because he was so dominant in his first three fights in the UFC. And Tyson Fury took the liberty of actually making this fight despite having the hardest puncher in front of him. Alexander Usyk was the boxing fight that the boxing world desperately wanted. This was the event that they believed was the litmus test for Tyson Fury, or as to whether or not his legacy would go down in the history books in boxing as one of the greatest of all time. And without this fight, it simply wasn't going to happen. But however, he had the former UFC heavyweight king and the lineal heavyweight champion of mixed martial arts in front of him, who was taking this fight incredibly seriously. Francis was making no reservations for the fact that this was an exhibition. He looked, I mean, despite the fact he looked horrible in his open workouts, and despite the fact he looked horrible, he looked like he was still up for the challenge based on his rhetoric and based on how he was talking in the lead up to this. In his open workouts, he looked so slow. He looked like he had horrible footwork, and it legitimately looked as if he had no concern for he had no concern for the fact that he had these deficiencies. He was coming in guns blazing. He was coming in to do the very best he could. And despite the warning signs for this fight, and despite how many people were writing Francis Ngannou off, the production of this event is arguably the best that I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, it looked like they had the Super Bowl, WrestleMania, and the biggest rock concert you have ever seen all wrapped up into one event in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which just showcased some of the biggest celebrities in the world. And usually I could not care less about celebrities that aren't in my actual niche, that aren't fighters. But it was just insane to watch. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was there. They had an insane amount of former boxers. There was this one picture where they had 50 or so former boxers all in one photo just outside of the arena. I mean, names like Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Julio Cesar Chavez, and so many great former boxers that came to watch this event, adding to the magnitude of just how important this type of cultural event actually is. At one point, you could see in the broadcast and on social media that Mike Tyson, Eminem, and Vince McMahon were all sitting right next to each other, which is just, in the front row. It just does not make any sense. And the great Teddy Atlas was there. So many other big journalists were there covering this event. And it really made this seem like this was a cultural phenomenon where two of the baddest people in their respective sports were participating for gold. They were participating for their bragging rights. They were participating for what was at stake, which greatly added to the magnitude of this event. Despite me writing Francis Ngannou off initially, I saw this lead up, and I was surprised. It was almost like a Super Bowl halftime show. There's obviously no halftime in boxing, so they got to squeeze it in somewhere. But it was absolutely nuts just how much they were putting into this. This was more than the influencer boxing we had a couple of weeks ago. This is more than any other title fight I've ever seen. Maybe the only comparable entrance and comparable pre-fight shenanigans, if you'll call it, was Pride Fighting Championships, when they had a production value equivalent to that of a mob organization, of the Yakuza. That's why they were able to put on such a big performance, and all that oil money that they have in Saudi Arabia seemed like it all went to facilitating this event and having it being the most incredible thing possible. And when I saw that, I was thinking they're really making this a spectacle because this fight was not going to be nearly competitive. It wasn't going to be nearly the fight that it ended up being. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the fight happened, and Francis Ngannou put on arguably the most important performance in combat sports history. And I'm not saying this lightly. There's no way that you could say that Francis was going to have a chance in this fight, and then he goes out and has the performance of a lifetime. He was able to knock Tyson Fury down in the third. He landed far more power shots than Tyson Fury, and his cardio looked better than ever. I mean, he was so well conditioned. It's like it was another fighter entirely in there. It's almost as if he paid no attention to actual boxing. Or, I mean, he's obviously a good striker. I'm not trying to write Francis Ngannou off. But he probably put so much effort into facilitating his cardio, or making his cardio as good as it could possibly be. And it paid out in spades. He looked so good. I've never seen such a large flip in terms of the cardio performance of a fighter, except for this one. This is as good as it gets. I cannot emphasize how good he looked. He was switching stances. He doesn't switch stances in mixed martial arts. He never switched stances against Cyril Gane or any of the other great fighters that he fought. And he didn't switch stances really against Stipe. He looked like a completely different fighter and overwhelmed the volume-minded Tyson Fury, which is just bonkers to say. It does not make any sense. And moving on to Tyson Fury, he put on one of the most embarrassing performances by a professional boxer in history. He was slow. He was lethargic. He didn't even get into his rhythm into the 6th round, and he elbowed Francis Ngannou. The boxer elbowed the mixed martial artist. What is even happening? Sure, it looked incidental. Sure, it looked like that was a right hook that meant to land, but he missed too short and the elbow happened to collide. It doesn't matter. He has never, ever done anything so sloppy. He's never looked so sloppy in his career. And the fact that he was doing things like telling Francis Ngannou he was going to take him to school, telling Francis Ngannou that, or just taking him so lightly that he was sleeping in the locker room minutes, like 30 minutes before the fight. And it's just, it was mind-boggling to me. It doesn't matter if he's not a boxer. You're going against statistically the hardest puncher in history. Statistically, I still think Deontay Wilder probably has more pop than Francis Ngannou for the fact that he's done the same thing with 8-ounce gloves on, which is certainly a big difference when you're talking about knockouts when Francis Ngannou typically fights with 4-ounce gloves in the UFC. And I could not believe what I had witnessed in that fight, and I was certain that Francis would get this decision. There's no way you could have argued that Francis Ngannou did not win this fight. There's no way you could have argued that Tyson Fury did enough with his jab and his right and his left cross or right cross. He switches stances, either cross, to actually win this decision. There's no reason. The scorecards are getting read out. 95-94 Ngannou. Like, just in shock. I'm like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. Next scorecard, 96-93 for Fury. No. There's no way. He won 2 more rounds than Francis Ngannou. There's not a chance that he actually did that. It was completely out of the question that he had won 2 more rounds than Francis Ngannou. I'd agree. In the third scorecard, they did give it 95-94 to Fury. Okay, you have WBC judges that probably value the jab and value certain things more. It still doesn't negate the fact that he was knocked down. It still doesn't negate the fact that Tyson Fury did not land nearly as many power shots or effective strikes as Francis Ngannou. At one point, Tyson Fury was dropped to his knees. It wasn't even taken. This is aside from Francis Ngannou's knockdown in the 3rd round. This was in and of itself. It's almost like he was physically crumbling under the pressure of this event and crumbling under the fact that Tyson Fury had wildly underprepared for this fight, and that Francis Ngannou came in and looked better than he ever has. He looked like a legitimate professional boxer. It looked like Francis could have beaten any single one of Tyson Fury's previous opponents, in my opinion. Deontay Wilder's one thing. That's like a 50-50. That's like an old Western shootout where you got 2 guys reaching for their guns and shooting at the count of fire. But Derek Chisora, Dillian White, any of those guys would have gotten murked by Francis Ngannou. And all the credit to Tyson Fury for staying in the fight. That's, again, great for him. But it's the tonality with which everything came after the fact. Tyson Fury ends up winning by split decision. And Fury acted like he legitimately did enough to win this fight, which is just as arrogant comes. The amount of outrage by MMA fans and boxing fans alike is unlike anything I have ever seen. There wasn't a single person. There is not a single person that I have talked to, that I have discussed this fight with, boxing fan or MMA fan or complete outsider, that believes Francis Ngannou did not win that fight. Every single person had him winning. And the fact that he had the audacity not only to claim that he won the fight, but bring Alexander Usyk into the ring and pretend like everyone wants to see that fight after Francis Ngannou just whooped him for 10 rounds is completely asinine. It did not make the least bit of sense to me at all. And this, in my opinion, could have been the biggest sporting event in world history, the biggest upset in world history. If Francis Ngannou got this decision, there is not another upset, not Buster Douglas versus Mike Tyson, not the USA versus the Soviet Union in the 1980 Olympic gold medal for hockey, not even Matt Serra versus GSP could even hold a candle to the gravity of how important this performance was for Francis Ngannou. If Francis Ngannou got this decision or knocked out Tyson Fury, it would have been like Michael Phelps outran Usain Bolt in the 100-meter dash in his prime. That would have blown everything out of proportion to a level that it would have made headline news on channels that have never talked about sports ever. That would have been the biggest and most incredible upset without question. Nothing could have touched that. And you got to understand, this has a lot to do, and this involves a lot of boxing's lack of credibility and lack of honesty and lack of legitimacy. And it takes it all into question just by how egregious this decision was, how wrong it was. Francis still could have won by split decision, and it still would have been the biggest. But so many MMA outlets, so many journalists, so many former fighters are coming out and expressing their outrage at just the level of ignorance and the level of audacity of the WBC judges to not give this fight to Francis Ngannou, who rightfully won. Chael Sonnen, the greatest of all time, Uncle Chael, he came out and said straight up that boxing's credibility is forever ruined, and he believes it's a fake sport. He tweeted after this event that Saudi Arabia had finally solved the climate crisis. They had finally found a better fuel to burn instead of oil, which they have done for hundreds of years. What they are now burning for fuel is boxing's credibility. They had the audacity to give it to the guy who came in out of shape, did not act like he wanted to be there, who got dropped, who had so many things go wrong for him, and still give him the decision because they wanted to insist. They needed to insist. They had to maintain their own pride. And by doing that, they've ruined the entire credibility of the sport. Let your champion lose and let people respect the fact that you guys are objectively looking at this fight rather than just pulling and taking a paycheck from Tyson Fury. I'm not saying there have been rumors that he paid the judges off, and so did Tommy Fury. But that can't be confirmed. What can be confirmed is that there's a level of illegitimacy in boxing judging that is so much higher than mixed martial arts and so much higher probably in context like this in comparison to anything else. Every MMA fighter's reaction video for this showed the exact same outrage. Every pro boxer that had Fury winning this fight has simply been MIA off of Twitter and off of YouTube and off of any social media and refuse to answer questions about this because they know exactly what happened. Events like this, in my opinion, have more of a room for corruption and in comparison to legitimate title fights. Let's say, for example, Alexander Usyk beat the brakes off of Tyson Fury even worse than Francis Ngannou did, and they still give Tyson Fury the nod. That would just be the seal for me. I don't think it will ever get to that point, because at this point, those boxing judges were fighting for the pride of the sport that they have been judging for their entire career. I don't think it's ever going to get to the point where it's going to be like the WWE, where there's a predetermined winner despite whatever may happen in the ring. But they completely tarnished the judging reputation of the WEC by having this decision be so wrong and so egregious. And I think this could have been one of the biggest events in sporting history, but we were deprived of this because of the corruption in boxing, because of the desire to maintain their own reputation, and the desire of and the potential that Tyson Fury and the Fury family may have actually paid off the judges. I won't go as far to confirm that because I just simply can't. There's no evidence to say that Tyson Fury or Tommy Fury has a reputation of paying off judges. But it is an obvious case in this situation that what they just did not just ruin Francis Ngannou or screw over Francis Ngannou. They screwed over the entire sport of boxing. It is not close. This is maybe the most egregious decision in MMA history, with the exception of Paddy Pimblett versus Jared Gordon, because that was even worse. He got a unanimous decision. At least Francis won on one scorecard. But the amount of outrage, the amount of nonsense that went into that decision, the amount of corruption that was evident in that situation was so prevalent. And shame on the referees that were involved in this, and shame on the WBC if this was some inside work, because they effectively tarnished the reputation of this sport for so many people. And despite this, now we have Sean O'Malley calling out Gervonta Davis and Shakur Stevenson calling out Gervonta Davis and so many other fighters all of a sudden wanting to go into boxing and wanting to try their mettle, because at this point, now they see that boxers are vulnerable. If you come in and take this seriously while you have someone preparing about as hard as Tyson Fury, it is evident that Francis Ngannou effectively gave the entire MMA community hope and legitimately gave them an opportunity to now go and fight. If you're in the UFC, I'll tell you right now, Dana White is never going to let you box. But if you leave the UFC, you go to the PFL, you go to One Fighting Championships, you go to Bellator, you go to any of those promotions, and you ask for the opportunity to box, they have the opportunity to have a potential superstar on their hands, because the level at which Dana White and the UFC fumbled the bag is astronomical. Dana White said before this that he didn't want to challenge himself, that he wanted the bag and he wanted to go elsewhere. Guess what? He went and took on the best heavyweight of our division and beat him legitimately in the eyes of every single person that watched this fight. And I don't think it's even a question in anyone's mind that this is not only going to open up the gravy train for so many UFC fighters that believe that their worth is greater than what the UFC will offer them. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see fighters like Ciryl Gane, someone who's not quite the level of fighter to win a UFC championship, and potentially move to another promotion, ask for a dual contract where he gets sponsorships, just like Francis did. He's got the sponsorship of the PFL. He now has a double contract where he has the opportunity to go and box, and now has the actual opportunity to win a world title. Maybe it's not the UFC, but win a world title. The more people start branching out, the more MMA is going to level itself out. And strangely enough, a boxing match involving these two guys is what brought this to fruition, which is what makes this event so incredibly special. It was just insane. We've never seen anything like this. Nothing has ever been like this. Because imagine, just hypothetically, imagine if Dana White had allowed Francis to go and box Tyson Fury, just like he had allowed Chuck Liddell to go over and fight in a Pride Fighting Championships Grand Prix, their middleweight Grand Prix. They imagine Chuck Liddell won. He would have been an international superstar pretty much instantly. If Dana White had re-signed Francis under the terms that he wanted, then he went on to go and beat Tyson Fury. Based on everyone's assessment, he would have been brought back home as a god. He would have been brought back home as the biggest superstar, the biggest heavyweight superstar in sports history. All respect to Mike Tyson. I think Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali still has far more star power than Francis Ngannou will ever have. But this is something that grows their stock exponentially. And Tyson Fury gave Francis Ngannou that by not taking this seriously. And Francis Ngannou went and took it from him. Above all, he went and took this seriously. He went and seeked out good training to ensure that he was well prepared for this fight. And all the congratulations to Francis Ngannou for taking the win. Taking the loss like a man, for upgrading his stock exponentially over the course of a loss, and for the credit of beating Tyson Fury up. If you guys saw Tyson Fury's face after this fight, he had a black eye. He was cut. He looked horrible. Francis Ngannou looked like he had just gotten out of a beauty salon and gotten a facial. He looked incredible. Obviously he had the two little baggy eyes because, yeah, you're getting punched in the face, but there was no cuts. There were no gashes. There was nothing. He won that fight. Everyone knows he won that fight. And all the credit to him for going out and doing the impossible. We are going to take a short break now, ladies and gentlemen. We will be right back with some more Slingin' Leather after this short break.
Awareness for driving high is illegal everywhere. A catchy song, of course.
You can't run, or you can't. What's going on, Chad? You guys got anything to say? You can't run.
Friendly reminder, don't drive high. If you feel different, you drive different. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Slingin' Leather, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Scuba Steve. Thank you all for tuning in. And we actually, aside from the insane big news that transcended every combat sport that we just discussed, there was some other big news that happened last week for the UFC's heavyweight division. We found out that UFC heavyweight champion Jon Jones had suffered a torn pectoral muscle, which he completely tore off of the bone. Just a nasty injury. I don't even think I've heard of something like that. I've heard of quads and leg muscles being torn off the bone, but this is the first I've ever seen of someone tearing their pectoral muscle off of the bone. And we actually got to see how this happened with Jon Jones wrestling with a fairly large guy, even by Jon Jones standards, a really big guy, where he was shooting a takedown and looking for a double leg reversal, and you could hear him yelp in pain. And this pretty much, before I had found out what this event was going to look like after the fact, I thought this event was legitimately ruined. He was carrying this event with Stipe Miocic so hard. And we are going to save those thoughts for later because he did his job in rectifying the situation. Or the UFC did their job in rectifying the situation. This will put Jones on the shelf for 8 months at the very least, and he is out of his fight with Stipe Miocic, the greatest heavyweight of all time. But Stipe was not even given an opportunity to actually stay in this event. If based on many accounts and many claims by Stipe and by other journalists, is that they didn't even give Stipe the opportunity to stay on this card. They didn't want to give him another opponent. They thought it was Jon Jones or nothing. However, I will digress because they decided to make an interim heavyweight title fight against, in my opinion, the legitimate two best fighters in the heavyweight division in the UFC. Tom Aspinall and Sergey Pavlovich are now fighting for the interim UFC heavyweight title. And in my opinion, this is a far more worthy title fight, despite the fact that the previous title matchup was against the consensus greatest of all time in Jon Jones and the greatest heavyweight of all time in Stipe Miocic. This should have happened so long ago. It's mind-boggling to me that they didn't actually strip Jon Jones. Sure, they want to keep their cash cow happy. Sure, they want to keep their loyal fighter who has only fought with the UFC up until this point in good graces with the brass. But if we're talking about just pure excitement and pure fireworks and pure entertainment value, Tom Aspinall and Sergey Pavlovich are both in the top 3 for average shortest fight time in UFC history. Tom Aspinall average fight time is 2 minutes and 19 seconds. Pavlovich, the third shortest average fight time in history, 2 minutes and 23 seconds. And this fight, in my opinion, is going to be infinitely more exciting. I think that there is potentially no way that Miocic versus Jones could have been any more exciting, considering Stipe is 41 and considering John Jones had such a short fight in his first event in his first heavyweight title shot against Cyril Gane. I think that would have been a great fight by all means. I don't think there's any way it would have been bad. I don't think either of them would have put on a non-championship worthy fight, considering how high level they both are. But this is for the real title. This is a far more credentialed and far more worthy of a matchup for legitimate gold than Jones versus Miocic is, in my opinion, considering that both of these guys, Jones and Miocic, are probably going to be out of the UFC within 2 years' time. Tom Aspinall and Sergey Pavlovich are hungry, up-and-coming contenders that want gold more than anything. And both of them have more than enough tools to get it done. But who has more tools? Who has more of an edge? Who has more ways to win? That, in my opinion, is Tom Aspinall. Mind you, I am a huge Tom Aspinall fan. Every fight I watch of his, with the exception of his injury loss against Curtis Blades, what has just been some of the highest level mixed martial arts I've seen, period, let alone heavyweight. It's probably the highest level mixed martial arts I've ever seen in the heavyweight division in terms of putting it all together. But Tom Aspinall has incredibly fast striking, and he's so light on his feet that his ability to close distance is about as good as any heavyweight in the division. And couple that with black belt level jiu-jitsu and a corner that respects him and knows his game so well. They know how to train his timing. They know how to attack with specific submissions. They know the level of their opponent very well. I think Tom Aspinall has a legitimate shot in this fight against the consensus number one contender at heavyweight in Sergey Pavlovich. And we cannot write him off. A lot of people are saying Sergey Pavlovich is the Russian Francis Ngannou. He has an 84-inch reach. One man has a longer reach in the UFC right now, and that is John Jones. And it is by half an inch. And John Jones has not nearly comparable power as Sergey Pavlovich. Sergey looks so devastating in every one of his fights. He looks like a world beater. It looks like he could go and beat any heavyweight in history. He could probably go out and do boxing and do incredible, considering just how fast his hands are and just how quickly he's able to dispose of professional UFC fighters. And I think that not only does he have an avenue in boxing if he ever leaves the UFC, but I think that if Pavlovich is able to keep this at a distance and stay off the ground, he could easily win this fight. This is about as big of a coin flip as we've ever seen for a title fight. These two are so good at shutting people's lights out that it could legitimately be a coin flip. I don't even know who I have winning this fight a week out. And I gotta lock this down for you guys next week because we're doing the prediction video on Thursday. But this completely changes the card. Now, not because it's not the heavyweight. I mean, not just because, geez, of course you have Logan Paul winning Rum. Of course you do. But the new main event for UFC 295 is Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka, which I believe is going to be an incredible fight. And unfortunately for Jamal Hill, he doesn't have the opportunity to have a say in this scenario because he's injured. He has this Achilles injury and he had to vacate his title. But Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka is going to be one of the most interesting striking battles of the year. We have Alex Pereira, who is former two-division Glory Kickboxing World Champion, former UFC middleweight champion, knocked out Israel Adesanya, knocked out Sean Strickland, and won a decision against Jan Blachowicz, which was very, very close. I think Jan Blachowicz may have done enough on the ground if he had at least attacked with one submission, but they did give the nod to Alex Pereira. And this is not saying Yuri Prohaska is not a worthy opponent. He has one of the most unique striking battles the unique striking styles I've ever seen. He almost fights in a karate or kung fu sort of stance where he has a wide stance, he has very long punches, and does a great job at closing the distance while being light on his feet. And I think this will be a very interesting puzzle for Alex Pereira to solve. Again, I have no idea who's going to win this one either because the styles are so drastically different. These are probably two of the most unique strikers in the light heavyweight division, which is going to be a lot of fun to watch. But there's only one reason that this is going to be the main event, and that's the fact that it's for legitimate gold. It's for undisputed gold, while Aspinall versus Pavlovich is going to be for interim gold. And I believe that this event is going to get incredible. Is going to do incredibly for 295. I think they've done a really good job at assembling the event, and they will do so further. And they will do so not only for this event. They're going to carry this event entirely, but they have some legitimately good prelim fights as well and on the main card. So this is going to be an incredible event. And now we have some questions. One from Gal Lulu. After watching Tyson and Francis showing that he has the gas tank to go the distance, do you think he'll become a formidable in the heavyweight boxing division? I do think so. Many people are saying that Francis Ngannou legitimately has a shot to beat any heavyweight boxer in the world right now, and he would legitimately be ranked probably top 10 or top 5 in the heavyweight division at this point. And I believe that there's a legitimate chance, considering just the amount of power he has, to do well against any of these guys, because we saw that the equalizer in that fight was Francis's power. That's what put Tyson on the back foot. That's what made Tyson so tentative. That's what really did not allow him to get his rhythm going to the level that it did. So absolutely. Francis Ngannou now has created two separate pathways of a career. It's two different career paths for himself effectively by doing so well in this fight and having the showing that he did, because he has probably made the most important performance for him that will push his career in any direction he wants so far forward. And this will increase his stock in the PFL because he's fighting in the PFL now instead of the UFC, and in the heavyweight boxing ranks. Every boxing promoter at this point is probably chomping at the bit to have Francis Ngannou rematch Tyson Fury for the legitimate title rather than Alexander Usyk. Alexander Usyk is an entirely different monster as well. Great power and incredible speed. But this will be a litmus test to see if Francis Ngannou did so much in this fight to raise his stock in the heavyweight boxing rankings enough. And I think so. It's a legitimate question whether or not he could beat a Deontay Wilder, a Dillian Whyte, a Derek Chisora, a Anthony Joshua, or a Tyson Fury if they actually do it legitimately this time. And I think that it could be great for Francis to try boxing. And if he doesn't do well, it is what it is. Got another couple questions. The Bronze Bomber versus Francis. My thoughts. Very, very, very interesting matchup. As I had mentioned earlier, I'd have to say that if I had to choose one of them in a vacuum, the Bronze Bomber, Deontay Wilder, has slightly more power than Francis Ngannou. And that is because he has shut the lights out in dramatic fashion against so many heavyweight boxers with 8-ounce gloves on. And I think that is a legitimate question, considering although Francis Ngannou is statistically the hardest puncher in history, that's because they measured it without gloves on. What would happen if they measured that same way, if they did the same test for Deontay Wilder in that context, And I think that it is very, very, very interesting that that may be the matchup to make. If Francis goes into boxing, I think that's what they're going to have to do. I would love to see him versus AJ. I think that might be another great fight to make, and I think that's a much more winnable fight for Francis. But I think that in terms of just pure entertainment value, in terms of what's going to make them the most money, I think Bronze Bomber versus Francis Ngannou, Deontay versus Francis is just going to be an absolute firefight. And that's going to have they had the baddest of the baddest or whatever the title was for this weekend. The two baddest guys in both combat sports going at it. I think that's going to be the two hardest hitters in history. That is going to be the two hardest punchers to have ever walked the face of the earth, going in and proving who is the best, trying to see who is the best, the baddest of the bad. Yes, thank you, Rom. And I think that's going to be an absolute firefight. Next from Galulu, that jab that knocked Fury down was crazy. Second question, Mike Tyson going full trainer for boxers in the future? Very interesting question. I mean, Mike Tyson may be going in the direction where he may want to start training fighters again. Again, it's still an unknown how influential Mike Tyson's coaching was in Francis's performance, because Francis Ngannou had Eric Nicksick, the MMA coach of the year for 2022, in his corner. He had a lot of his mixed martial arts trainers in his corner. He didn't have Mike Tyson in his corner. Mike Tyson definitely helped him establish some technique, establish some footwork, and establish a game plan for his matchup against Tyson Fury. But I'm really going to have to see if Mike Tyson is able to coach another fighter to that level. If he is going to be able to make a legitimate world champion out of a different fighter that has less power. Like, let's say, for example, Mike Tyson goes out and coaches an Anthony Joshua, or goes out and coaches a Derek Chisora, or a Dillian White, or a Zhang. I think that there is a legitimate there's going to be a lot to prove for Mike Tyson as a coach. And I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that he had one of the hardest punchers in the world training him. Sure, as Ram, you had mentioned, being a former kickboxer, his footwork did not look that great. But when it came to the fight, he looked far more prepared and far more sharp with his movement and his stance switches than he did in his open workouts where Mike Tyson was there. Was that the result of Mike Tyson's repeated insistence on better footwork, or was that Eric Nicksick's game plan going into the fight that night? That, I think, is a legitimate question. Mike Tyson has something to prove. I think he legitimately has something there where he could be a good boxing trainer. I don't think he could be a head coach. I don't think he could be a Teddy Atlas, but I think if you have someone with enough skills that emulates Mike Tyson's style, he could very well help a fighter become a legitimate title challenger or world champion. Next one from my boy Edgar Hernandez. Couldn't be here this week, but shout out to my boy. Thoughts on whether you rather see Usyk versus Fury or the matchup between Ngannou? I gotta be honest with you. I before Saturday, I was dying to see Usyk versus Fury. That was the fight to make months ago. But just how incredible Francis's performance is really starting to make me second guess my decision. Usyk versus Fury will establish Fury's legacy in the sport of boxing. If he rematches Ngannou, this will establish his actual legitimacy as a boxer, period. Because he did himself such a disservice not preparing for this fight accordingly and not taking the time to realize who he had in front of him. A hungry contender that was looking to shock the world. I think that what's going to do better numbers is Fury versus Ngannou. But what is boxing going to pick? They're going to pick Usyk versus Fury because they are legitimately concerned as to whether or not Tyson can actually beat him. That is exactly my thoughts on the situation, because I no one's gonna buy Fury versus Usyk at this point. They just saw him get beat up by an MMA champion of the world. What makes you think that that Tyson Fury is going to be able to do as well against Alexander Usyk? That's my concern. That is my legitimate concern. But I think either fight will do very well in terms of the pay-per-view. I just think everyone in the combat sports community is probably going to insist that they do this rematch for legitimate gold. Or second option, or second scenario, you put Tyson Fury on the shelf for a minute and you book Francis Ngannou in a boxing match with a legit heavyweight contender. What if he goes out and knocks Dillian White out cold? What's going to happen then? Then it's legit. Then he is proven. He has proven himself. Then he is going to have the opportunity to go out there and do it for all the marbles. And Tyson Fury is going to come in shape. He's going to come in prepared, and he's going to come in with the knowledge of their previous fight. And despite my level of ignorance going into the first fight, saying that Francis had no chance, I think Tyson Fury, with a better training camp, with better preparation, could beat Francis Ngannou again. I think it's legitimate. But it is going to have to take a Herculean effort that I don't know if he is really going to have in the grand scheme of things. So another one from Edgar. Do you think Fury had a night? I'm sorry. Do you think Fury had a bad night due to the lack of training, or was Ngannou just legitimately that good? I think it is legitimate. I think it's a legitimate combination of the two, because Francis looked better than he did in any of his open workouts. So you could argue he had the best night of his life. You can argue that he had the performance of a lifetime in that. But you could also argue that Tyson Fury came in there underprepared, with worse cardio than we've ever seen, and unable to read Francis Ngannou to the level that many people predicted that he would be able to. So I think that it's a combination of the two, but if I had to legitimately determine what played more of a factor, I think it legitimately is Tyson Fury's lack of preparation. Again, I've already showered Francis Ngannou with all the praise that he deserves for an incredible performance. But I think that if Tyson Fury comes in with a far better training camp, with taking this completely seriously, there's one of two things that could happen. We're going to get option one. We're going to get the same fight. We're going to get a razor close fight where Fury is stunned by the power, but rather than unable to find his rhythm, he's going to be able to read him a bit better. He's going to know his tendencies, and he's going to have a better game plan. Or we have a scenario where Tyson Fury returns to championship form and potentially has his performance of a lifetime and is even hungrier against a guy that many believe beat him. So I think that rebooking that fight will answer a lot of questions and would legitimately, uplift Tyson Fury's reputation, considering it is at an all-time low right now. And I think that is reason alone, a big enough reason alone to make this fight. So what we got next? From Ron Praveen, that fight will just keep Fury with the belt. Let Francis get his footing the sport. Wait, what? Ron, what are you saying? Let Francis get his footing. The sport, Francis will be a beast. Okay, so Francis, I'm assuming you think Francis Ngannou will be a beast in boxing. I think that's legitimate. I think that's a legitimate speculation, and I think that's a legitimate potential for what could actually happen. Because if he chooses to do that, he could do very well. He already did it against someone who is that good. So we're going to have to see about that. Next one from Edgar Hernandez. Potential matchup between Ngannou and Andy Ruiz. How do you see that playing out, knowing Andy upset Anthony Joshua? So, okay. We've seen how tough Andy Ruiz is, and we've seen how good he can be in a short notice fight against a guy who many believed was on his way to being the greatest heavyweight of all time in Anthony Joshua. And despite this being the case, Anthony Joshua does not have the power Francis Ngannou holds. And I think that the question here is legitimately going to be, will Andy Ruiz be able to make Francis Ngannou miss and connect with his own shots on the inside, just how he did with Anthony Joshua? Because their proportions are very similar. Anthony Joshua is a bit taller and has a bit of a longer reach, but he doesn't have that one-shot knockout power that Francis has. Anthony Joshua has great power. No one's not saying that, but it's different. Francis Ngannou hit different. He hit Tyson Fury with a shot just above the ear and sent him clattering to the canvas. And Andy Ruiz already got dropped by Anthony Joshua in his fight. And sure, he took it well. I'm not saying he got knocked out cold and had an Undertaker moment just like Francis Ngannou did against Deontay Wilder, or I'm mixing up the two right now, that Tyson Fury had against Deontay Wilder. But I believe it is a legitimate question whether or not Andy Ruiz's defense will be good enough to overcome the power of Francis Ngannou. But again, a huge question. And I'm curious for you guys, are there any other boxers other than the ones we had mentioned that you would potentially like to see Francis Ngannou fight? Are there any potential matchups that you think would be a legitimate litmus test and a legitimate test to see whether or not he could contend with the heavyweight contender? I'm curious if there are any. Ngannou shocking the world offers many huge opportunities for crossover for boxing and MMA fighters specifically. Do you see the likes of Adesanya or Usman making a boxing debut? No. For this reason alone. Kamaru Usman is already damn near 40 years old. He's already pretty old. And I think that he does not quite have the boxing acumen of Francis Ngannou because he's a wrestler. He came in as a wrestler. He came in as a grappler. And that's not saying the man can't punch. He knocked out Jorge Masvidal out cold, a guy who had never been knocked out in his entire career. But who would he fight? He's not going to beat Canelo. There's no way he's going to beat Canelo. I don't even think he could beat a guy like Billy Joe Saunders. I don't think a lot of the super middleweight division he would succeed against. Israel Adesanya, I think, has a better opportunity. I think that his hands are far better, but the thing is, I don't think he is going to come in as underprepared or with a lack of experience like Usman would. And interestingly enough, Sean O'Malley called out Gervonta Davis, which is an asinine move, which I'm not even going to start and explain about how big of a mistake that's going to actually be, because Tank's defense is just that good. And then Shakur Stevenson comes out today calling out Sean O'Malley, which I think is, again, completely ridiculous for Sean O'Malley to even entertain the idea of getting in with a defensive mastermind like Shakur Stevenson. But I think a legitimate contender for an MMA fighter to go into boxing is Alex Pereira. I think he could do very well. And he has suggested that in the next couple of years, after potentially putting a light heavyweight title reign together, he would be more than willing to step into the boxing ring. And especially with that power that he has and his knowledge being a two-time two-division Glory Kickboxing world champion, he legitimately has a shot at beating some legit guys in the cruiserweight division if he chooses to fight there. So, yeah, I think there are certainly some mixed martial artists that will now see the road to boxing. One guy that a lot of people aren't talking about is Adrian Yanez, who has some of the fastest hands in the bantamweight division in the UFC. If he went to 135 in boxing and locks his defense down, he's about as fast as any guy in that division. And I think that would be the deciding factor. I think the speed difference is going to be legitimate. So what else we got? What the other guy, Ruiz Jr. So Andy Ruiz is a heavyweight boxer who previously held the title after he took it from Anthony Joshua on short notice. And one of my favorite boxers. Absolutely loved when Andy Ruiz was boxing. He's almost like boxing's DJ Khaled, if you will. But next one from Edgar Hernandez. I think Arslanbek Makhmedov and Ngannou would be a massive fight, knowing people call Magomedov the Russian Mike Tyson. He fought on the Fury undercard, getting a first-round TKO. And yeah, actually, question, Edgar, if you're able to answer this on short notice, how tall is Makhmedov? Because I think that could be a legitimate thing. If he fights like Mike Tyson, like if he's bobbing and weaving with a similar style, I think there could legitimately be something there. That could be a great booking. Does Francis have a shot at beating Ruiz Jr.? Absolutely, he has a shot at beating Ruiz Jr. I think if he sticks to as tentative as if he is as tentative as he was or as patient as he was against Tyson Fury, without a doubt. Makhmedov is 6'5". Okay. 6'5.5" to be specific. But he I think that is that's even more interesting, because let's say he was 5'11.5" and he was able to get under the punches of Francis Ngannou a little easier. We'll have to see. But if you're calling him the Russian Mike Tyson, he probably has that level of power that is, as storied. I mean, potentially as storied. Again, I've got to be honest with you. I've yet to hear from or see this guy. But I think that could be a legitimate fight, depending on the styles. Again, styles always make fights. And especially if they have some styles that will or produce a great main event, I think it's going to be a legitimate question. Again, I think Francis Ngannou has a legitimate shot against a lot of boxers in the heavyweight division right now. What excites me about the future of boxing with this huge turn of events in this division, the heavyweight division is in desperate need of legitimate contenders, because at this point, the lightweight division in boxing is far surpassing. The welterweight division is far surpassing interest in comparison to the heavyweight division, which in the 90s was the division to watch, was the most storied division and the most hyped division in the 1990s. I think it's very possible that once you inject some legitimate star power from potentially MMA, like you get a Francis Ngannou, you get a Cyril Gane, you get a Sergey Pavlovich, potentially this could inject some more life into the heavyweight division. And especially Sergey Pavlovich, I think that dude would do work in boxing. That dude, he is so fast. I mean, now that guy could legitimately be a champion in boxing, in my opinion. But I think that this got the ball rolling, very similar to how Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia got the ball rolling with making sure that the top fighters in their weight class actually want to fight each other. This was the problem for the longest time. This is why we didn't get Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather when we should have. We got it so late because they had refused to make the fight, because there was no interest. Since Floyd, specializes in professional bank robbing or dodging fighters, I think this is a legitimate dodging fighter sort of thing. I think this is getting the ball rolling for boxing in a lot of different ways, and specifically the heavyweight division. We are coming up on the time, ladies and gentlemen. We got another 90 seconds. If we got any other questions, be sure to get them in. What else we got? But no, let me think. What are some other great MMA fighters? Edgar, we'd love to have you on again, dog. You're always welcome. But I mean, if I had to put a list together, Sergey Pavlovich, Adrian Yanez, Alex Pereira, Tom Aspinall maybe, and potentially if he puts another win streak together, Israel Adesanya could legitimately do some work in pro boxing. That is all the time I got for you today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to Radio DePaul Sports, the student voice of your DePaul Blue Demons, and we will see you guys in the next one.